All the testimony and all of the evidence is intended to drive home the point that the entire conspiracy to conceal hush money payments that were made to suppress damaging information about Donald Trump from getting out and being known by the American voter before the 2016 election was done at the behest of and at the direction of Donald Trump. Now, during his opening statement, Trump's attorney Todd Blanche asked the court this question, quote, "Think for a moment. Would a frugal businessman, would a man who pinches pennies repay a $130,000 debt to the tune of $420,000? To that question, prosecutors said, heck yes, and they showed where the math was done. They brought a wealth of circumstantial evidence and such documents to make their case. From Trump org employee Jeff McConney, not just explaining the documents that show how Trump's employees got to that $420,000 figure, but also how they sought to conceal the hush money. McConney also revealing that Donald Trump is a boss who kept a very close eye on every one of his pennies. To Trump's own words from his own books that reveal he was a proud, self-described micromanager and cheapskate, making it all the more plausible that he had to have known about a plan to conceal payments made to Stormy Daniels. As for Trump's team, they will be coming off of an attempt to discredit the star witness in the case, Michael Cohen, that, from those of us watching from the cheap seat, seemed to go awry. Attorney Robert Costello, who claimed that Michael Cohen told him Trump did not know about the hush money payments, was literally undone by his own words, specifically emails that he wrote and sent that showed that he aimed to pressure Michael Cohen into protecting Donald Trump by repeatedly invoking Donald Trump. The New York Times notes this: the defense had hoped to damage Mr. Cohen, a key prosecution witness, beyond repair. Mr. Costello's choppy performance may be remembered, too. The Trump election interference hush money trial in its final stages is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us at the table, NBC News correspondent Yasmin Vasuvian is here, plus former top official at the Department of Justice, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman's back with us. Also joining us, former U.S. attorney, former deputy assistant attorney general Harry Litman's here. So, Andrew, we've lived in, and you've been joining us at 5, and we've all been living together in what's been happening as we've come on the air. Today's sort of the first day to exhale and kind of process what was happening. And I have to say, every day, what we had sort of prepared to read and present to our viewers based on what had happened before 4 o'clock in the East was not what we ended up covering, because something twisted, something turned, something happened in a way that no one expected it to.
So interesting. I was going to say, I have never done a trial where something unexpected doesn't happen. You can prepare all you want, and some piece of evidence, something takes on a life of its own. The other thing, and I used to prepare witnesses this way when I had witnesses like Michael Cohen, is I would say to them, look, no one can prepare you for everything. It's just not possible. Something's going to be presented, and this is what you need to know. No matter what it is, just remember, just think in your head, what is the truth about, just think about what you remember and just say it. It doesn't matter if it's really bad. It doesn't matter if you're saying I stole money from the defendant. Whatever it is, just remember your lodestar at that moment is the truth. And I think just related to this trial, it goes to I think, frankly, the only point where the defense actually scored any sort of surprising point was on what I think now is just a lot of theater. And I think it was also sort of to me, I took it as a test of how Michael Cohen was prepared and how he did on the stand, which is, I thought he actually answered with that kind of lodestar in mind, which is, he's like, that is still what I remember. Yeah. And then when the photo came out, it really, to me, was important, because I kept on thinking about, he did not know when he was talking about a phone call where the record was with Keith Schiller that was going to be at a time that Donald Trump was actually going to be there. I mean, what if he said that and it turns out that Donald Trump was actually giving a speech or was in a different location, and it turns out he was like, no, I think that's when it happened. And I thought it was a sort of, to me, it was something I would argue as very corroborative of him. And so I think I'm not surprised that something unexpected happened that changed the narrative in terms of what we're going to talk about, but that is how trials work.
Well, and in terms of a plot twist that changes the entire narrative, and again, we have no idea how the jury experienced any of the witnesses or any of the testimony, but we do know that the jury saw the courtroom cleared out multiple occasions for only one witness, and that was Robert Costello.
That was such a huge mistake. I don't know for a fact, but it has to be that was Donald Trump's decision with a tin ear as to at least how it played to me. I'm not speaking for the jurors. It did so many things. We were talking before we came on air, it corroborates Michael Cohen as to who this guy is and why he didn't trust him. So he's an exhibit in that sense. It showed that Donald Trump was the leader, that he was at the head of this. It showed an obstruction conspiracy of trying to keep Michael Cohen from being heard by this jury. I mean, that is what I would argue to the jurors. It's like that man, meaning the defendant, did not want you to hear from that man on the witness stand, and that's because he knew he had the goods. I mean, it was, and just his demeanor, to your point, in terms of Michael Cohen is the person we thought would behave like Bob Costello, and Bob Costello behaved in a way that was, there's no way that the jury did not react to that. I mean, by that point in the trial, they've lived with the most dispassionate, lovely, judge with incredible judicial temperament, and juries in general like judges, and here they have every reason to like this particular judge. There's no way that they did not think this was highly inappropriate, and this is the defendant's case.
Yeah, I mean, again, we don't know if the jury is consuming the evidence in a narrative sweep. It was certainly presented as such by the prosecution. And in the narrative sweep that the prosecution presented, it was a story about a conspiracy that is conceived of in a meeting in Trump Tower in 2015. And the principals are David Pecker and Donald Trump. And the person who's sort of a mid-level staffer in that conspiracy is Michael Cohen. The story concludes dramatically in the cross-examination of the defense's only narrative witness, and that's Costello. And the prosecution gets to land on new evidence of the effort to suppress the mid-level staffer, who in every mob movie is the guy that sort of flips because he's got the books, or he steals the books, or he copies the books, and Trump's role as the person who would make sure that everyone could sleep, that Michael Cohen could sleep well at night because he had a friend in a high place. The only person that Costello was talking about at the White House was Donald Trump.
I think back first to Susan Hoffinger's direct on Michael Cohen and how they set up the narrative of Robert Costello without knowing at the time that Robert Costello was going to be called as a defense witness, because for all intents and purposes, Robert Costello was a late ad. On Friday, when our own Tom Winter reached out to Robert Costello as to whether or not he was going to testify, he said he was ready, willing, and able, actually wanted to testify, but had not yet spoken to the lead defense attorney, Todd Blanche. But even in that narrative, in setting up Robert Costello in this relationship, Hoffinger asked Michael Cohen as to whether or not he told the truth to Robert Costello about Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump. Did they have sex? She asked him. And he said, no, he didn't tell him the truth. And in fact, he didn't trust him. And that is why he did not tell him the truth. And I remember when that moment happened, I remember talking about it on television at the time as to why Michael Cohen said he did not retain this individual who was a good friend of Rudy Giuliani's, who had emailed him and saying, you have friends in high places, sleep well at night. I am meeting with my client my friend who is meeting with his client, meaning Rudy Giuliani, and the president of the United States at the time. What do you want me to communicate with them? So then when Robert Costello took the stand and acted the way in which he did in that courthouse, going to Andrew's point, really kind of corroborating Michael Cohen's testimony, a lot of jurors, I imagine, walked away on that, what was it, Monday, when Robert Costello first took the stand. And instead of thinking about Michael Cohen and what may have come from that testimony, they likely walked away thinking about Robert Costello and the way in which he acted towards Judge Juan Merchan. I mean, remember, this jury was very focused, and you and I saw it, especially with Stormy Daniels. They their energy feeds off of Judge Juan Merchan. And if Juan Merchan is not into one of the witnesses or feels as if the witness is being disrespectful or not answering the question succinctly, then he holds them to account. And I imagine they were feeding off of the same energy that they felt from Juan Merchan when Robert Costello was on the stand and, rolling his eyes at Juan Merchan, staring him down. I can't imagine they walked away thinking much about Michael Cohen at that point and instead thinking about Robert Costello and thinking Michael Cohen likely corroborated, or Robert Costello corroborated Michael Cohen's testimony.
And to the